So the reason I wanted to make this video is because I wanted to basically give you guys sort of an update. So remember how I've mentioned maybe once or twice about how I wanted to make a feature film? But right now I really want to get into a feature film and then release it by Friday, June 10th, 2022. And then of course the plan is to premiere that feature film by June 10th, 2022. Like, that was sort of my overall plan. So where this started was back in 2017. I kind of had the idea where I basically refer to it as my 5-star plan. I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but the whole point was that in 2017, I would start developing short films. And the whole goal was I would make these short films, either sell them, do premieres, sell them on DVDs or whichever, and then gradually lead up to what would be my very first feature film, which would then be released by June 11th, 2022. And that was the goal for the longest time, is that every year I would make at least 1 or 2 short films, try and make as much money off that as possible, and all the money from those movies would go straight towards making the feature film. Well, that didn't really happen so much. It was more just, it's hard making short films, and, we hear all the time about, like, oh, it's okay, you don't need a lot of stuff to make a short film, you don't need a lot of money. You kind of do, you kind of don't, and especially when it comes to a fantasy, you do need some money. And unfortunately, I didn't have much of it. I was kind of tied up with other things. So I couldn't make as many movies as I would like to. So one of the first short films I made since 2012 was a short film that I produced called Becoming One of Them. And that's, at the moment of this video, is currently just finishing up its festival run before we actually do an official release. Since then, in 2020... Was it 2020? Yeah, it was 2020, the end of 2020. I released my next short film. And I say mine because I wrote, produced, and directed it. And that was Finding the Light of Natha. So that was... Finding the Light of Natha was one of the short films I was planning on making in sort of that big 5-year plan. And I didn't really make it until 2020. The only reason I was able to make it in 2020 was because I finally had the money to make a short film. And then we get to 2021, and I knew that this was a time where I had to make the feature film. The whole goal was that I would keep making movies up to this point, keep releasing short films, make money off them, and put them towards my feature film. So 2020 to 2021 was trying to especially make as much money as possible and crowdfund. Then we got to 2021, where the idea was we would start pre-production and start shooting the movie. And then between the fall of 2021 to June 2022, that's when we start doing post-production. So, what happened then? So, in 2021, I finally announced that, hey, I'm working on my very first feature film called The Light of Korgan, which follows the events after the short film Finding the Light of Natha. They're all in the same universe. And so I did a crowdfund. Now, you want to know how much money I made from that crowdfund? Well, actually, a friend gave me $50. That was basically kind of it. But I didn't really make anywhere near my goal, nowhere near enough to even make it worthwhile. So I was like, you know what? Okay, whatever. I'm going to be funding this out of my own pocket. You're normally not supposed to. But at this point, I was like, hey, fine, I'll just fund this out of my own pocket. So, okay, fine. So then what I started doing, and I made this announcement in June. The whole idea was we were supposed to start pre-production at the beginning of the year, if not in 2020. The only reason why it kept getting pushed was because of the script. And the script was, again, this was my very first feature film, so getting used to writing short films and then writing your very first feature script took a very, very, very long time. And it was something I wasn't used to. So it took a while. I ended up not getting the script even remotely ready until late August, because I was just getting close to making it better and better and better and better. And finally, it was somewhere I was like, you know what, I'm actually happy with this. We can shoot this. So while I was working on the script, of course, I started gathering the team and started getting people together. So the very first people I reached out to was a buddy of mine who does visual effects. He's worked on several movies of mine in the past, and so he was the first person to come on board, and I was very glad that we got to work together again. Second person I reached out to was a production designer, and again, someone who I've worked with many, many times. So these were like my main three criteria people that I absolutely had to have on the team. And so we started discussing the script and how we're going to adapt this, and especially how to do it on a short time and a short budget. So we started figuring stuff like that out. Then I had to go away and figure out the script, and in the meanwhile, start doing like location scouts and everything else. So at this point, while we were waiting for the script to finish, I was also going to locations, figuring out who I want to work with, what locations would be good for the movie. A majority of the movie basically takes place outside, so I was looking for places like farms or any sort of property that had big forests in their backyard, and see if maybe anyone would be willing to sort of sponsor the location, which is not uncommon because I've done sponsorships and stuff like that on other projects in the past, and it usually works out for everyone. So I usually lucked out and found a couple phenomenal locations that would have worked out really, really well. So then, as I said, so by the end of August, I finally had a script finished, and we were kind of ready to proceed and started locking things down and started figuring stuff out. Now, here is the other problem. So it's now the end of August, and I wanted to shoot at the end of October. And the reason why is because originally I was going to shoot in September or early October, because you don't want the weather to be too hot or too cold. End of October was the most latest dates that I could come up with without going into November, which meant that we were most likely going to be dealing with winter. So we aimed for the end of October. By the end of August, that meant we had 2 months until we had to start shooting. And there wasn't a lot of time. So it's end of August. Unfortunately, my production designer was going through some sort of personal issues, and unfortunately had to sort of pull away. And I understood, and we didn't really start much of anything because we were waiting for the script, so it was perfectly fine for her to leave, and it wasn't really affecting the project overall. It wasn't like we were in the middle of work and all of a sudden she left, so everything was fine, and we understood. So this meant that, of course, I had to find a production designer. Now, unfortunately, because we were working on an extremely low budget, that meant that we had to find a production designer who was willing to come on the project for free. And typically, what you pay is what you get. And what I mean by that is we weren't able to find an experienced production designer who naturally fit onto the project, who was also willing to work for free. This happens. What it just meant was we couldn't get a production designer. Simple as that. And there was a lot of art stuff to do on the project. So that was very, very unfortunate that we couldn't find one. Something else that started to happen was, as soon as the script was finished, I reached out to several of these locations, several of which, actually pretty much all of them, were very enthusiastic about working on the movie. And when I asked them all if we could solidify this, write out a contract, make sure that we're all on the same page and see if everything's okay, the long story short is they all said no. And they all had their own reasons, which is fine. The problem was that we are now in the middle of September. We are 6 or 7 weeks away from having to roll cameras. And at this point, no locations, with the exception of one, which we would do for our indoor locations. I did not have a production designer. The only people who were on the team overall at this point was myself, of course, my friend who was a visual effects artist, and 2 actors who actually played a couple of the characters in Find the Line of Natha, who would be reprising their roles in The Line of Corgan. So it was basically just the 4 of us. And unfortunately, I had to come to a very, very hard decision where we were 6 or 7 weeks away. We had no locations. The project was falling apart. And I mean, there was really just the four of us. I didn't even have any other actors signed on. And so, unfortunately, I had to make the hard decision and say, okay, we're going to have to walk away from this for the time being, which was very unfortunate because I really wanted to deliver this movie in June next year, 2022. That's just how life is. So we had to cancel it, unfortunately. And that doesn't mean that it's canceled indefinitely. What it means is it's postponed until we can come back to it a little later. Maybe we can get a bigger budget, and even more than that, we can have a lot more time than what we worked with. The good news now is that the script is done. And because we already got started with most of the pre-production, some of the pre-production is already done. I've already come up with my shot list, my storyboards, some of the concepts already been figured out, and we figured out how we're going to achieve certain art things, certain visual effects. So a lot of the stuff has already been figured out, and that's the good part. And so now it just means that, unfortunately, I don't get to make the feature film for June 2022. That's what it means. Maybe we'll visit this next year. Maybe we'll revisit it 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. Who knows? So that's just what happened with a feature film, so we will not be continuing with that. However, the other good news is, to be very, very honest, as soon as I made the decision to no longer make the feature film, I honestly had this huge relief off my shoulders because it was such a lot of work to make the feature film. And of course, I knew that full well going in. But it felt a lot better knowing that I wasn't going to have to work on that and squeeze it in 6 or 7 weeks. Instead, if we postpone it for another time, we can make sure to give ourselves plenty of time, whether that's 8 months, 9 months, or heck, even if it's at least 6 months, that's plenty of time. And maybe at another point, we'll have a much, much bigger budget, making the job so much easier, and would have more resources, and we don't have to worry about, well, we don't have money for this, we don't have money for this, we don't have money for this. So sometimes sort of canceling or saying, no, we can't shoot this now, we're going to have to postpone for another time, it's usually the better decision. I've already had a couple people who I've mentioned this thing to and say that I've had to cancel it. They all agree that they think I made the right decision to cancel. Unfortunately, this stuff happens, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. I don't think there was anything that we did wrong. It's just we just got unlucky. That's it. And so maybe next time we'll just get even more lucky. But as I said, it was a huge relief off my shoulders to know that I don't have to force myself to be pressured to make any of that stuff right now in the constraints that I had, and just push off for another time. And from doing that, it's actually allowed me to come back and do YouTube, because I've had to postpone from YouTube for a long time, mainly because I was working on the feature film. I also get to work on a couple other short films, which I've had to sort of push off to the side and get to continue working on them. And of course, I have time to do more stuff. So that's been actually really, really great. So it's kind of funny how sort of what you might think is a failure might end up turning into something even better. So I wanted to share this, A, to give you an update, but also B, I wanted to, I don't know if you need to hear this, but I hope you know that if something happens, you lose something, or you've had to cancel something or postpone something, you know what? Maybe it was for the better. And I'm not saying that necessarily in a hurtful way, but think of it in terms of the positive. That maybe postponing it might allow you to do it at a much better time. Who knows? Because you know what? There are some things that are out of our control. So I hope you can take away something positive from this. That's why I genuinely hope. But, of course, as you guys know, I'm going to keep you guys updated once we start going up and running with the feature film, because I'm certainly looking forward to the feature film. I think we have a great script, and I'm really, really excited to bring this to the screen. So, yeah, let me know down in the comments if there's anything from this that you find interesting as sort of a takeaway. I just try and be open as I can with these stories and, want to give you guys the most realistic sort of version of what it's like in the film industry and what's it like as a filmmaker and making these movies. You know what I mean? Because I don't want to gloss over it. I don't want to hide any of the sort of dark secrets or the harsh reality of it sometimes. But as I said, these stuffs happen. These things happen. So, thanks very much for your time for watching. And yeah, good luck with your projects. I hope you certainly don't have to postpone your stuff. But if it happens, please don't fret about it. Maybe it'll be better the next time around. All right. So good luck, and I'll see you next time.